A helicopter swoops over a high school, piloted by a man twice the age of the teenage girl he's trying to impress. Sounds like the start of a fairy tale, right? But what if we told you this story ends with a brutal murder that fooled an entire nation? Today we're diving into the chilling case of Caroline Crouch, a tale of young love, deception, and a crime that shocked Greece to its core. Get ready for a story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust. Our story begins on the picturesque Greek island of Eloped. It's 2017, and the sun-soaked beaches are filled with tourists and locals alike. Among them is 15-year-old Caroline Crouch, a British girl who's called this island home since she was 8. Caroline's life is pretty typical for a teenager. She goes to school, hangs out with friends, and dreams about her future. Little does she know, her life is about to change in ways she could never imagine. Caroline was born on July 12, 2001, in Athens, Greece. Her parents, David Crouch and Susan Della Cuesta, were expats who fell in love with the Greek way of life. When Caroline was just 8 years old, the family decided to move to Alonissos, a small island in the Aegean Sea. It was here that Caroline grew up, surrounded by the crystal-clear waters and laid-back island lifestyle. As a teenager, Caroline was known for her vibrant personality and zest for life. She was passionate about kickboxing and had earned a black belt. She loved the sea and was an accomplished scuba diver. To her friends and family, Caroline seemed to have it all: beauty, brains, and a bright future ahead of her. Enter Babis Anagnostopoulos, a 27-year-old commercial helicopter pilot. He's visiting the island where his mother lives and works as a teacher at Caroline's school. Babis is everything a teenage girl might dream of. He's handsome, successful, and clearly interested in Caroline. But here's where things get a bit weird. To catch Caroline's attention, Babis does something pretty over the top. He flies his helicopter over her school. Can you imagine that? It's like something straight out of a romantic movie. Now you might be thinking, hold up, isn't there a big age gap here? And you'd be right. 12 years is a significant difference, especially when one person is still in high school. But to Caroline, this probably felt like a dream come true. Here's this older, successful guy, literally going to great heights to impress her. It's the kind of thing that can make a young girl's heart race. Their courtship was swift and intense. Babby was charming, attentive, and seemed to offer Caroline a glimpse into an exciting adult world. For a 15-year-old girl, the attention from such a successful older man must have been intoxicating. But looking back, we have to wonder, what does a 27-year-old man see in a teenager? Was this the beginning of a manipulation that would eventually lead to tragedy? Fast forward 2 years, and Caroline and Babis are married. They've set up home in a suburb of Athens called Glyka Nera. From the outside, their life looks perfect. They have a beautiful house, Babis has a good job, and soon they welcome a baby girl into their family. Their social media accounts are filled with smiling photos, beach vacations, cozy family moments. It's the kind of life many people dream of. But here's the thing about social media. It only shows what people want you to see. It's like a highlight reel of someone's life, not the full story. And in Caroline and Babis' case, there was a lot going on behind the scenes that nobody knew about. Let's take a step back for a moment. How many of you keep a diary? It's a place where you can write your deepest thoughts and feelings, right? Well, Caroline kept a diary too, and what she wrote in it tells a very different story from those smiling Instagram posts. In her diary, Caroline talks about fights with Babis. She writes about feeling trapped and wanting to leave. There's one entry that's particularly heartbreaking. She writes, "I love Baby so much that I can't leave him, even though this relationship hurts me." Can you imagine feeling that way? Loving someone so much that you stay even when the relationship is causing you pain? It's a situation many people find themselves in, but it's especially tough when you're as young as Caroline was. But the diary entries get even more concerning. In July 2020, just after their daughter was born, Caroline writes, "Today my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told Babis I want to leave. I feel awful." This shows us that Caroline was thinking about leaving for a while. She was torn between her love for Babis and her desire to escape what seems to have been an unhappy marriage. Now you might be wondering why Caroline stayed if she was so unhappy. Well, it's complicated. For one thing, she was very young when she got married. She might not have had the life experience to know how to handle such a difficult situation. Plus, now there was a baby involved. Caroline writes in her diary that she stayed, "So my daughter would not grow up without her two parents." This is a reason many people stay in unhappy relationships. They want to keep their family together for their children. But here's where things take a really dark turn. On May 11, 2021, the police in Nera get a distressing call. It's early in the morning, around 6 a.m. When they arrive at Caroline and Babis's house, they find a horrifying scene. The place looks like it's been ransacked. Drawers are pulled out, contents scattered everywhere. Valuable items are missing. But that's not the worst of it. Upstairs in the bedroom, they find Caroline. She's dead, smothered with a pillow. Their 11-month-old baby girl is next to her, crying and trying to wake her mom up. It's a heartbreaking scene. And Babis? He's found tied up with duct tape over his eyes and mouth. When the police free him, he tells them a terrifying story. According to Babis, 3 men broke into their home in the middle of the night. He says they tied him up, killed their dog, and then murdered Caroline when she wouldn't tell them where their money was hidden. Greece is shocked by this brutal crime. People are scared. If this could happen to a young couple in their own home, couldn't it happen to anyone? The media goes into overdrive, covering every detail of the case. Babis becomes a figure of sympathy, a grieving husband who watched helplessly as his wife was murdered. The police launch a massive investigation. They're looking for a gang, possibly from Albania. They even arrest a guy who looks like the sketch Babis helped create. The whole country is on edge, wondering when these dangerous criminals will be caught. But here's the thing about investigations. Sometimes they uncover things that nobody expects. As the police dig deeper into the case, they start to notice that some things just don't add up. First, there's the neighbors. In a quiet suburb like Nera, you'd expect someone to have heard something if there was a violent break-in. But none of the neighbors reported hearing any commotion that night. The only sound they remembered was the couple's dog crying in distress. Then there's the physical evidence, or rather, the lack of it. In a violent struggle involving multiple intruders, you'd expect to find DNA evidence or fingerprints. But the crime scene was clean. Too clean. The police also found it strange that the supposed intruders had killed the family dog by hanging it from the staircase. Why would burglars take the time to do something so cruel and time-consuming? It didn't fit the profile of a quick professional robbery. Another red flag was the state of the house. While it looked ransacked, experienced detectives noted that it seemed off, like someone had tried to make it look messy, rather than the natural chaos that occurs during a real robbery. But the real game changer, it was something Caroline was wearing that night, her smartwatch. This little device, which many of us use to count our steps or check our heart rate, became a silent witness to what really happened that night. The smartwatch recorded Caroline's heart rate throughout the night. At 3:58 a.m., her pulse was normal, suggesting she was asleep. But at 4:05 a.m., her heart rate suddenly spiked by 50%. This indicates she was under severe stress, perhaps fighting for her life. By 4:11 a.m., the watch recorded no pulse at all. Caroline was dead. Here's the problem. This timeline didn't match Babis's story at all. He had claimed the intruders didn't enter their home until later. This discrepancy was a huge red flag for the investigators. But wait, there's more. Remember how Babis said he was tied up during the attack? Well, his phone had a fitness app, Installed. And guess what? That app showed he was moving around during the time he claimed to be tied up. It's like his own technology was betraying his lies. And there's one more detail that really made the police suspicious. Babis had claimed he called for help using just his nose because he was tied up. When the police tried to recreate this, nobody could do it. It seemed impossible. All of these inconsistencies led the police to a shocking conclusion. Maybe there were no intruders at all. Maybe the killer was much closer to home. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details came to light. The police discovered that Caroline had recently tried to book a hotel room for herself and her daughter. They also found text messages where Caroline had threatened to leave Babis. It was becoming clear that their relationship was far from the perfect picture they presented on social media. The police also looked into the couple's financial situation. They found that Babis and Caroline had recently purchased a plot of land with plans to build their dream home. Caroline's parents had given her $50,000 for this purpose. Could money have been a motive? Was Babis worried about losing access to this cash if Caroline left him? So, what really happened that night? Brace yourselves, because this is where the story takes its most shocking turn. After hours of intense questioning, Babis finally breaks. He admits there were no intruders, no gang, no robbery. It was all a lie. The truth? He killed Caroline himself. According to Babis, they had a huge fight that night. Caroline threatened to leave him and take their daughter. He says he lost control and strangled her, then smothered her with a pillow. And all of this happened while their baby was in the room. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been for Caroline in her final moments? And how traumatic for their innocent child? But here's the truly chilling part. After killing his wife, Babis didn't call for help. He didn't break down in remorse. Instead, he spent hours staging a fake crime scene. He killed their dog to make it look real. He messed up the house, hid valuables, and even tied himself up. All to create this elaborate story about a gang of robbers. For over a month, Babis kept up this act. He gave tearful interviews on TV, talking about how much he missed Caroline. He attended her memorial service, playing the part of the grieving widower, all while knowing he was the one who took her life. Can you imagine the level of deception required to do this? To look Caroline's family in the eye, knowing what he had done? Now you might be wondering, how could someone do this? How could they kill their partner and then pretend to be the grieving husband? It's a question that haunted Greece and still does to this day. Looking back, there were warning signs in Caroline and Babis's relationship. Remember those diary entries we talked about earlier? They show a pattern of control and manipulation that had been going on for years. For example, when Babis and Caroline got married, they eloped instead of having a traditional Greek wedding. At first glance, this might seem romantic, but it also meant that Caroline was isolated from her family and friends on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. Once they were married, Babis continued to isolate Caroline. He was the only one bringing in money, while Caroline was a university student without much of her own. Even when Caroline's mother would send her some money, Babis would take it. This financial control is a classic tactic used by abusers to keep their partners dependent on them. Caroline's diary also reveals that she felt trapped in the relationship, especially after she became pregnant. She writes about wanting to leave, but feeling like she couldn't because of the baby. This is a common situation in abusive relationships. The victim feels like they have to stay for the sake of the children. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is how Babis managed to fool everyone for so long. He didn't just lie to the police, he lied to the entire country. He appeared on national television, crying and pleading for the killers to be caught. He attended Caroline's funeral, playing the part of the grieving widower perfectly, all while knowing that he was the one responsible for her death. This level of deception is hard for most of us to comprehend. How can someone look into the eyes of their victim's family, knowing what they have done, and continue to lie? It's a disturbing reminder that sometimes the monsters in real life don't look like monsters at all. They can be charming, seemingly normal people who are capable of unthinkable acts. The case of Caroline Crouch shocked Greece to its core. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that was shocking, it was the betrayal. This wasn't a random act of violence by strangers. It was a husband killing his wife, then manipulating an entire nation into feeling sorry for him. As the truth came out, people were left with so many questions. How many other perfect relationships hide dark secrets like this? How can we ever really know what goes on behind closed doors? And what about the victims who don't have smartwatches or fitness apps to reveal the truth? And then there's Caroline and Babis' daughter. She's now growing up without her mother and with her father in prison for her mother's murder. How will this trauma affect her as she grows up? And how will she ever come to terms with what her father did? The case also raised important questions about domestic violence and the way society views relationships with large age gaps. Many wondered if more could have been done to protect Caroline, who was essentially still a child when she began her relationship with Babis. In May 2022, justice was finally served. Babis was found guilty of premeditated murder, animal abuse, perverting the course of justice, and lying to authorities. He was sentenced to life in prison for Caroline's murder, plus an additional 11.5 years for the other charges. But even as Babis begins his sentence, the ripple effects of his actions continue to be felt. Caroline's parents are now raising their granddaughter, trying to give her a normal life despite the tragic circumstances. They've spoken publicly about their determination to keep Caroline's memory alive and to ensure that their granddaughter knows how much her mother loved her. This case has also sparked important conversations in Greece and beyond about domestic violence, especially in relationships with significant age differences. Many are calling for better education about the signs of abusive relationships and more resources for those trying to leave dangerous situations. So what happens to a man who not only murders his wife, but deceives an entire nation. As Babis faces justice, we're left with haunting questions. How many other perfect relationships hide dark secrets? And what about Caroline and Babis's daughter, growing up without her mother, her father in prison for her murder? But perhaps the most chilling question of all is this: if Babis hadn't made those small mistakes with the evidence, would he have gotten away with it? Would Caroline's murder remain unsolved? Just another tragic home invasion? It's a thought that might keep you up at night, and it begs the question, how many other killers are out there, hiding behind a mask of grief, fooling everyone around them? The next time you see a heartbreaking story on the news, will you wonder if there's more to it than meets the eye? In a world where appearances can be so deceiving, can we ever really know the truth? As we end this chilling tale, remember Caroline Crouch. Remember that behind every headline, there's a real person with hopes, dreams, and a life cut tragically short. And maybe, just maybe, her story will help someone else recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight. And who knows? The next big true crime story might be unfolding right now, in a seemingly perfect relationship, just waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this case, then make sure to check out the next one.